You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. I am Tammy Urbanic. Thank you so much for joining me. Journey for Truth Radio is always on demand and with many new episodes. My website, empowermentthroughhealing.org. On there, you can read about different life energy flow Tai Yi treatments. One in particular is called Stress of Death. This treatment will help people who have PTSD. It's most effective when the person is already receiving some therapy, receiving some assistance, but this is going to give the added boost in helping really release some of that trauma that was created through trauma. Stress of Death on my website, empowermentthroughhealing.org. Also, JonahLifeInstitute.com. Definitely have it. Give yourself a chance. Go there. Sign up for the free newsletter. You'll receive lots of great information. It's all, as I said, it's free. Also, you're going to be given the opportunity to read about different events that are going on. JonahLifeInstitute.com. My guest this week is Kevin Hall. He's a world champion Olympic sailor, two-time cancer survivor. He also has struggled with bipolar. And Kevin's going to share with us his difficulties and his great accomplishments. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's thrilling to be here.
Now, when did you begin realizing you may have bipolar?
I guess one of the crazy things about it, the difficult thing at the beginning is you don't know. And so you I started out with a manic episode, not a depression. And I literally lost my mind, became very delusional, wandered off of my college campus and into a big 2 days in Boston before I got arrested. When I was first arrested and then taken to the emergency room and then the psychiatric ward, they didn't know exactly what it was. They thought it might be Lyme disease or encephalitis. There were lots of testing, but eventually my symptoms presented enough it became clear that, back then they called it manic depression. And
right.
Sometimes I think is a better name. It's a little more clear what's going on. Bipolar to me feels a little evasive in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So how old were you when that all occurred?
Right. Yes, that I was 20 years old. It was 1989.
Wow. So you had all of this manic episode. What did that look like for you?
I was delusional, completely delusional. Since then, Dr. Joel Goldus ended up calling it Truman Show delusion after the movie with Jim Carrey. And basically, I thought there were cameras everywhere and a director coordinating improv actors all around Boston telling me what to do, putting little words in my ear about what I maybe should do. And I thought the whole world was watching me.
Wow. Now, can you describe for people who, I'm sure most or all of the listeners have heard of bipolar, manic depression, can you describe for the listeners what it's like really having it?
I can try. I can describe my version of it, I suppose.
Of course.
It's we all get the same label, and it's all a little bit different for each of us, but many of the symptoms and behaviors tend to be fairly similar. In a hypomanic or almost manic delusional phase, there's a lot of energy, a lot of thrill of living, a lot of joy usually, and then somewhere in there becomes more and more irritability. Lose track of what's a good decision and what's a bad one. In my case, I have way more books than I could possibly read. I buy art. I get involved with Kickstarter campaigns. I do a lot of things that I end up later regretting because I can't basically afford them. At some point after that stage, I become, at least my version is that I become completely delusional and have this, what we're calling Truman Show delusion now, and I have voices in my head that tell me what to do and where to go and what to say, and I just think it's all really great for everybody watching. After that, after I end up in the psychiatric ward, which I think I'm up to 14 times now, proud of that. On the other hand, I'm still here.
Yeah.
There's medication for bringing me back down and kind of shutting it all right down and trying to stop the psychosis. And those medications are really terrifying. They're very hard. They take away who you knew you were and replace it with something that's slowed right down. And then I get really depressed. Really, really depressed. And I've been lucky to just make it out of some of those. Really only just barely make it.
That sounds like a major roller coaster, and it takes a lot of courage. I'm assuming it takes a lot of courage for a person to really keep working with that and not just give up, to just pull the plug. And unfortunately, I'm sure that there are many people who have decided, I'm out of here. I can't take this roller coaster anymore. It sounds very scary, challenging, and very courageous.
I think the difference probably isn't in the people so much as in the support they have. And I've been so fortunate to have a tremendous amount of support and love and general acceptance around me for a long time, almost since the very beginning. It's
Very
an
true.
elephant in the room with my family for lots of reasons, and I've caused them a lot of havoc and consequences and things they've had to clean up. But I hope I've provided them some reasons to be proud and some joy as well.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what do you think led to it? Childhood, different events that occurred?
Well, you start out with the genetic predisposition argument, and it tends to run in families, although I can't actually evoke that one because there is none in my family.
Not even perhaps a grandparent or, wow.
No, just very little on either side, and that was one of the things that caused everybody to scratch their heads a lot early on. And made us a little bit reluctant on chronic, forever manic depressive diagnosis that I needed to accept and embrace. So there's genetics. For me, I think what happened is I was really stressed out about exams. And so it was my junior year. I was taking 2 upper level math classes. And I wasn't doing as well as I was used to. I was used to being a world champion and being the best, the smartest guy in the room, basically. I was used to that for years and years. That was, for 16 years anyway, that was me. And when I got to Brown, that just wasn't true anymore, not even close. And I got very sick. I got a fever and a really bad rash. And after that is when I stopped sleeping and started drinking a lot of coffee to try and make up for exams. And I think it started out maybe as much a spiritual crisis as anything, and I didn't have the tools to cope.
Now, very interesting couple of things that you said piqued some interest. So did you catch a virus or anything when you stated you broke out with a rash? And
Right.
was that viral?
I had shingles, or herpes zoster it was called. And so, yeah, really bad rash, and in the infirmary for a week, and IV drip, and playing go fish when my mind finally came back, and that was tough.
Now, did that happen before?
Yes.
That happened before the symptoms of bipolar.
Right.
Do you think there's any possibility that it actually traveled to your brain and created a brain virus?
I think there's some it's very much a chicken and egg. The virus invaded me, and then I was always doomed. It's hard to say, but
right.
I think I'd like to be able to go back with the coping skills I have now and try again. I think the result could have been very different.
Certainly. And now you also stated that it was kind of a spiritual crisis, and you didn't quite know how to cope. What I have always learned and what I've experienced with a lot of people that I've worked with, there's always these patterns. We can always trace things back to patterns. So are you saying that really when you look back at your childhood and your adolescence, that there really weren't any patterns that would lead to kind of this emotional, spiritual crisis?
I was a high achiever, and I had a lot of energy, and I often stayed up late at night, so those patterns were maybe already there. But I also believe that who I was my achievements, and that was more or no less than my last race and last exam. And I think that's a setup for a very difficult spiritual position to be in later.
Yeah, of course.
When you have to start facing that, A, you might not always win, and B, there's a whole world out there and you don't know anything about it. And yeah, I think facing that was not something I was ready for. I was so devastated. So the short version is, if I'm no longer worth anything because I can't win, why don't I just have a psychosis and make myself the most important person in the world? I kind of boil it down to that, really.
Wow, yeah, certainly. That makes a lot of sense. How did you stated earlier that it became the elephant in the room and your family decided needed to kind of clean up the mess. How else did it affect your relationships?
It was hard for friends to stand by me after the manic episodes. I've been so irritable and really eventually just rude and predictable. And with family, we're still in the middle of it. My mom and dad have, I think their versions have grown maybe apart since the beginning. When we were just in a crisis mode, we were together on that. More recently, my dad still sees it as essentially medication regimen non-compliance. He sees my spiritual crises as a choice to to screw it all up, really. And I think my mom more recently has come to realize that going off medication and seeking answers in other places is really part of the illness. It's part of the challenge.
And your wife, I read that you have a very supportive wife and children.
I sure do. Amanda and I met in college, and so I had my first manic episode before we met, and she met me just before I got cancer. But she's a healer by spirit and now by trade as well, and I was just lucky to cross paths with her.
Awesome. I love hearing that. You just brought up cancer, and that actually leads me into my next question. You mentioned that having cancer was easier than having bipolar. I mean, to everything that you're telling me, I can see that. I can see where your line of thinking goes with that. But I would love to hear you kind of give your story as why is cancer easier to work with than bipolar?
Sure. I should start by saying I've been fortunate to have the kind of cancer that ended up being curable with a lot of surgery for me. But the short answer is stigma. There's stigma and some unknowingness around cancer. It was other, it was different, it was scary, it was the C word. And that's gone. The stigma's gone. Now we get a bracelet and we get a hashtag and we get people rallying around us and we get parties and fundraisers, and it's just, if you have cancer, we're just going to beat this thing on the head by tomorrow. When you get out of the mental hospital, except for a few very close friends, people just don't know what to do because it's scary. It's different. It is a different tribe. The people who have mental illness challenges are so different from most people that it's scary for them, and the tendency is to run away. So, and that stigma makes it really hard to seek help when you're in the in-between stage when it could go either way.
Certainly, and I can imagine that when a person comes out of a mental hospital, other people, friends, family, don't quite know what to say perhaps, or don't know what might cause a trigger, probably like walking on eggshells, and I can imagine that becomes tension within a relationship. Now, you were 20.
Go ahead.
You were 20 when you found out you had cancer, is that correct?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So my first cancer was 20, and again, I was lucky. In a sense, I was lucky because I had surgery and compartmentalized it, and that was that. I was back out on the race course a few weeks later. On the other hand, sometimes I wish I had slowed down more and looked at it a little more closely. I mean, it gave me a quick chance to ask myself what's important, but the answer I gave was winning races. So I didn't learn that much the first time.
And now it came back again. The cancer did.
Well, it didn't come back again. The same cancer, a new cancer came to the other side, which is somewhat rare, I suppose. But no, it wasn't the original cancer. It was a whole new, brand new one. And instead of it going downstream from the first one, having lain dormant, it just presented itself as a brand new cancer on the other side. We didn't know that at the time. We thought it had come back, so I had a huge lymph node section, my whole abdomen completely cleaned out. And when those tests came back benign, everybody was very confused. And just 2 weeks later, the other testicle hemorrhaged.
How did you treat the cancer? Did you go through the let's call it normal or conventional route?
It was all surgery for me back then. So there was discussion of radiation as well, but I didn't want to do that. It didn't seem necessary and turned out not to be. But basically, if you catch it very early with testicular cancer and remove the testicle, and that was my case, we caught it early because my testicle hemorrhaged. So in a sense, I was lucky, although it was very painful. That can be the end of the story, that part of it.
Wow. Again, very courageous, cancer 2 times, and in the midst of that, dealing with bipolar and the symptoms of bipolar. You, and I'm shifting a little bit back to that, you had mentioned earlier that you're trying different methods than the medication method. What are some of the alternative methods that you're looking into and trying?
I've been thinking for years that I should get more into yoga. I think when I used to sail every day, that was very meditative, and that helped me. I'm not sailing so much anymore. I know that writing helps me a lot. The centering of being fully immersed in the writing process is very therapeutic in a number of ways, I think. So I think writing really helps me. And just, I could still do a much better job at eating better. I have to be really careful about my sleep. A lot of these things are kind of standard textbook things, but they're hard to actually do. It's easy to say and very hard to do.
Those are some great alternatives. So essentially you're talking about kind of keeping your mind and your brain into a clearer space, a cleaner space to keep those symptoms at bay, so to speak.
Yeah. At the beginning of a manic episode or during acute parts of depression, I think medications are fantastic and necessary in life, no question. I would like to continue to explore reducing the amount that I need to stay healthy. I think there's a balance there that maybe I could continue to push a little bit.
Now, do you alter your diet at all, taking out some different foods and adding in different foods?
So I'm still in really early stages with that. I think I think Amanda would say I essentially still have eating disorder challenges, and my go-to when I'm really struggling, although I'm not super proud of it and it's not ideal, is sometimes I just go raid the pantry, and that's all I know how to do. And at the time, I forgive myself and slow down, and maybe next week I'll do a better job. But at this point, I'm still in the middle. I guess my most recent manic episode was only a little more than a year ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm not doing as well with my eating as I'd like to. I have to be gentle about it.
Mm-hmm. I've heard a lot of things about sugar and the effects that processed sugar is what I'm talking about, but the effects that processed sugar has on the brain, and that it really becomes so addictive. And so that's why I was wondering, if you're looking at your diet and, okay, we need to take out sugar, we need to take out these other things that end up having a negative impact on the brain and the brain processing. So, but you're still working on it.
Still working on it. Have a long way to go there, but I'm still here.
Yes, exactly. You still have time to figure it out. Exactly. What do you want people to know about really having a mental illness that perhaps they're not aware of?
Probably the biggest one, from my perspective, is that when people are struggling, it probably looks from the outside like they're not trying, they're not doing their best, they're not doing everything they know how to live well and to be a good person near their friends and loved ones and colleagues. And at least in my case, I can assure the listeners, and I try to reassure my family that I am always trying, I just don't always cope so well. And with that hand I've been dealt, the way I handle crises is apparently to turn my mind into some big imagination factory where I get psychotic, and it's not ideal, but it's the best I know how.
So really wanting people to understand that it's not that someone's not trying, it's that a person may not be producing a result that someone else thinks should be produced.
Right.
I think that happens a lot, that people will form these judgments of this is what they think you should be doing, this is what they think the result should be, or the effects should be. And when they don't see that, then they jump to conclusions that you're not trying or that you don't care. And I think many times that's very incorrect. I'm sure it's true for some individuals. There's in every different situation, but I think many times it's simply not true. I think in some cases, a person is wanting to give up as well. They've tried these different things and they're not seeing the results that they think they should see, and they do start to kind of give up. But like what you were stating, you're trying alternative methods. It's not necessarily the medication route that is beneficial for you in your eyes, and you need to try different ways, and your father doesn't agree. And I think that happens in many, many cases.
The medication, 14 years without a manic episode, and I had a very successful career, and I think medication is a really good thing. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't always allow the soul to be itself. It doesn't, it's very complicated to say, am I who I am when I'm on my meds? And maybe that the meds are the best choice for continuing to jump through hoops and for keeping the pressure off family, and I think medication is important, and I'm very grateful for the ones I've had. However, there are times I just know it doesn't feel like me anymore, and that's just a hard burden to bear. And so I'm trying to learn to find a balance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And where can people find your information and your book?
Available on Amazon, and in fact, I'm thrilled to announce just today that the audiobook has just been released last week.
Excellent.
Read by an actor friend from New York, a really fantastic man, Andrew Sellon, who's done a tremendous performance. I get to rediscover it listening to him. It's a different interpretation, and so the audiobook is really neat. That's on Amazon and Audible and iTunes as well. And my website is KevinAHolt.com.
Excellent. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for being a guest on my show this week.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much for your questions.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.